Good afternoon. On behalf of the Nebraska Holocaust Commemoration Committee, I'd like to welcome all who have joined us here today. I'd like to particularly thank our three poetry authors, whom I will introduce a little bit later, from Lincoln Public Schools. I'd like to thank our singers from Omaha Scut, their director and accompanist, for joining us today. I've been asked to share at this time a letter we've received from Senator Deb Fischer. Dear fellow Nebraskans, today we gather to honor the many men, women, and children who lost their lives during the Holocaust. It is extremely important to continue to remember this terrible tragedy. To the survivors and families, please know that all Americans join in this commemoration. Let us remember their stories and work toward creating a better future for all generations. Thank you for coming from near and far to show your respect. It is appreciated by so many Nebraskan families. My prayers are with you all. I'd like to acknowledge several dignitaries joining us today. From the Lincoln City Council, we have Council members Gaylorn Baird, Jane Raybould, Roy Christensen, and Carl Eskridge. The committee would also like to thank State Senator Patty Pansing Brooks for being our sponsor for this year's commemoration. We'll be hearing a few words from Senator Pansing Brooks in a few moments. Most importantly of all, I'd like to personally thank and acknowledge the dear souls that we see in front, our survivors. For it is their lives we honor today, as well as the souls of the millions of victims we remember at this beginning of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Week. The Nebraska Holocaust Commemoration is held in this beautiful room, our own state capitol's rotunda, to acknowledge the Holocaust was a state-sponsored atrocity, made legal by laws passed that gave permission to persecute, separate, and annihilate millions of Jews, Roma, political prisoners, mentally and physically handicapped, and homosexuals. We must continue to eradicate hate and bigotry in our world, regardless of its form. Our history shows that evil thrives when good men do nothing. It is our desire that every person here not only becomes educated about the past, but work to ensure a future where such hatred, prejudice, and bigotry will forever be eliminated. Because of the solemnity of the commemoration, we ask that there be no applause or further recognition. We will not be introducing any of the participants other than the poetry readers this afternoon, and will follow the order of the program as printed.
Good afternoon. I'm so honored and feel so privileged to be here speaking to you all today. Today we have many heroes in my mind, who include the survivors of the Holocaust, in which so many lives were viciously and senselessly taken. We have the heroes who are related to those around us who were so needlessly lost their lives, who lost significant loves within their own lives, lives that were ripped from their own. We also have heroes among us today who remain vigilant and steadfast to the determination to tell the stories of the Holocaust, to never let us forget what happened to millions of cherished souls. I want to remind us all of a quote with which you are no doubt familiar, that is emblazoned on our beautiful Capitol right outside of those doors. It says, "The salvation of the state is the watchfulness of the citizen." These words still ring true nearly 100 years after they were etched in our building. And as we look around the world, we see democracies that are crumbling at times before our very eyes. Today in Turkey, the backwards and fascist policies of Turkish President Erdogan are eroding their precious democracy. We were in Turkey in September 2015 and saw journalists that are being arrested for what they write, while judges are being tossed into jail for positions they opine. We can see the Turkish democracy falling as Erdogan attacks the press, the universities, and as his government stifles free expression. History reminds us that there is a spectrum of democracies, and with strong democracies on one end and weaker ones on the other, we see that democracies can fail and people can be endangered through that failure. It is partially due to the will of the people not being carried out. The United States offers this lesson in its recent history closer to home. African Americans were forbidden to vote until 1870, and to a large extent were prohibited until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Women were denied the vote until 1920. Poll tax debtors, which included illiterate and poor Americans, until 64, and 18 to 21-year-olds until 71. The way the U.S. treats its minorities today as compared to 200 years ago is an improvement. But as we think of some of the historic triggers that we know of the Holocaust, we must remain mindful and remember to avoid repeating history. Germany had a democratically elected leader who made big promises based on his rhetoric and based on the fear-based threats from both inside and outside of the country. Fear of outsiders, resentment of the success of certain groups, resentment by struggling lower class, the have-nots. There was suppression of dissent, extreme nationalism, rejection of those who were different. We must always be watchful of the erosion of individual rights, and we must work to maintain our freedom of press, and we must fight against religious intolerance of all opposing beliefs. We must remain watchful about the suppression of dissent and punitive reactions to problems, and a polarizing approach to leadership. We must remain vigilant against the tendency to believe that those with whom we disagree are the enemy. Such beliefs undermine the rule of civil law. One fact remains that where there is a failure of democracy, there is generally a lack of equitable treatment of minorities and those on the voiceless margins of our society. We must remain watchful for the dangers inherent in a weakening democracy, as so many souls who were killed within the Holocaust show to us today. Our society carries the seeds of unrest that threaten to creep into our democracy and fracture it with authoritarianism and totalitarianism. The threats are simple as they are pernicious. We can see the forces chipping away with the insidious fear of outsiders, the increasing gaps between haves and have-nots, our persistent institutional racism, discrimination against our LGBT brothers and sisters, as well as inordinate attacks against other cultures and religious institutions. If we are not careful, if we are not watchful, we will not be remembering the lessons that so many gave their lives for us to know, so many lives that were taken through the Holocaust. The response to these fears can develop into great threats like extreme nationalism and repression of dissent, as well as the erosion of individual rights and freedom of the press. As we are remaining watchful citizens and vigilant, we must protect our precious democracy and the rights of all people. We must remember the lives that we have lost before us and the lives that stand before us today with such power, our heroes. As Pastor Martin Niemöller so wisely stated, first they came for the socialist and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. My friends, we must never forget. We must constantly stand up and speak for each other, for the salvation of our state, We must remain watchful citizens. Thank you.
My poem is called Tattoo. This tattoo, an insult, a stain, a painful substitute for a name. To the monsters, nothing but a number that longs for nothing more than eternal slumber. This tattoo, inked upon this lifeless skin, etching a permanent reminder of where I am, a living hell they call camp, where work makes you free, and by free they mean dead, straight through the chimney. This tattoo, an unwanted scar, denying me of hope, knowing death is not far.
My poem is called What It Means to You. For most, a star represents not much, merely a dot in the sky, but for others, it represents a stolen faith, fear, and devastation. For most, a fire represents warmth, just a light in a fireplace to warm up the night, but for others, it represents the death of innocent people, their own kind. For most, bunk beds represent a nice place to rest, somewhere to put your head after a long day, but for others, it represents the feeling of being cramped with no escape. For most, bread and soup simply represents food, a simple dinner maybe, not anything to be excited about, but for others, it represents their life and fighting to survive. For most, a doctor represents safety and helpfulness, somewhere where problems can be fixed, but for others, it represents the terror, suffering, and experimentation. For most, sleep represents calmness and relaxation. But for others, it may mean never waking up. So when you speak, whomever you may be speaking to, what does this mean to them, these simplistic things? Maybe nothing, but to them, maybe everything.
My poem is called Silence. Silence. There's only silence. Silence for those who died. Silence for those who were captured. Silence for those who were silenced. Silence. Silence like the tears of separated families. Silence like the sound of Jews being taken from their homes. Silence like the people who are not allowed to speak their mind. Silence. Silence unlike the cheering of the Nazis after the Jews were captured. Silence unlike the screaming of children being dragged from their parents. Silence, unlike the laughter of the children who were safe from the Nazis. Silence. Let us all take a moment of silence for those who had silence forced upon them. Thank you.
In every age, a hero or sage came to our aid. At Hanukkah, Jewish people celebrate. Antiochus issued a decree forbidding Jewish religious practice. Revolt was led by the Maccabees, who refused to worship Greek gods and fought for the right to practice their religion. In every age, a hero or sage came to our aid. This line from a song is jubilantly sung every year at Hanukkah. When Antiochus issued his decree, the Maccabees came to the aid. It's reassuring to believe that someone is out there looking out for you. Hanukkah is a celebration of overcoming oppression and how a miracle where one day's worth of oil was able to provide light for 8 days, reclaiming the right to practice religion, a celebration. At Purim, Jewish people celebrate. One of the only times we're encouraged to make noise, a lot of noise, in our synagogues. An evil man named Haman plotted and planned and set out to kill Jewish people. He failed, and each year at Purim, there is a celebration. Costumes are worn to temple, there are carnivals in our social hall where children play games, have cakewalks, and win prizes. We eat cookies shaped like Haman's hat called Hamantaschen. During services at Purim, when the name Haman is said, congregants yell and use noisemakers to drown out Haman's name. In every age, a hero or sage came to our aid. Haman tried to kill Jewish people, and his plans were thwarted. Mordecai, Esther, and King Ahasuerus came to the aid. The result is a celebration, and these plans were not successful. While there are celebrations during Hanukkah and Purim, Yom HaShoah is not a time of joy. At Yom HaShoah, we mourn. In every age, a hero or sage came to our aid. During the Holocaust, the aid did not come in time. In addition to those murdered, millions others had their lives tragically changed forever. One of those people was my grandfather, Richard Gummers, my papa. My papa was ripped from his home on November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, where across Germany and Austria, an estimated 30,000 Jews were taken from their homes by Nazi special forces and sent to concentration camps, while citizens and the government stood by and watched. My papa was taken to Dachau. While many others were murdered, he was able to survive. Everything my papa had was left behind. Everything he and his family had worked for were gone. He left Germany with no possessions. However, he felt fortunate to leave alive. Holocaust survivors, people like my grandfather, have shared their stories about what they went through to keep memories alive, to help prevent similar atrocities from occurring. Sadly, many survivors are no longer with us. My grandfather passed away 20 years ago, and those who are still with us find it increasingly difficult to share their memories. My Jewish education included participation in a program called March to the Living. In 1990, I participated in the first year of this program that still exists today. Along with hundreds of people from across the world, we gathered in Poland. We visited Nazi death camps, Treblinka, Auschwitz, Birkenau. We saw the Warsaw Ghetto. These sites have been preserved where possible so the atrocities of the past can be remembered. Standing in a gas chamber, seeing rooms that were filled with shoes or eyeglasses or other belongings that were taken from prisoners before they were murdered. Bunks where prisoners, our ancestors, were forced to sleep. Walking 3 kilometers from Auschwitz, the work camp, and Birkenau, the death camp, the road known as the March to the Death. While on this walk, I remember wondering about the despair going through the minds of those who walked during the path during the Holocaust. Following our time in Poland, we went to Israel and saw Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Israel. The raw emotion and sadness of the trip ended on an optimistic note, celebrating Yom HaAtzmaut, the Israeli Independence Day, while in Israel. In the year following participating in the experience, I had the opportunity to share what I saw and learned across the metro area. Over 50 presentations to schools, Rotary groups, nursing homes, professional associations, and even speaking at this event in 1991, 25 years ago. It saddens me that many Holocaust survivors are no longer with us. The horrors my grandfather and others like him were forced to endure are remembered at Yom HaShoah. In addition, at Yom HaShoah, we not only mourn, but as importantly, we remember. The phrase, "never again," is often said, Never again shall we let this happen. Never again. Those who remember history are not condemned to repeat it. Never again. When I first heard this phrase, I remember being confused. I thought, of course this would never happen again. How could something as catastrophic as the Holocaust ever be allowed to happen again? How could there ever be someone as evil as Hitler? Of course this could never happen again. Or could it? I lived the first 17 years of my life in Omaha. I currently live in Overland Park, Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City. A couple years ago, just 3 miles from my home, a man who hated Jews left his town and traveled to the Overland Park Jewish Community Center, where he murdered a man and his grandson who were walking into the community center. He then drove to a Jewish retirement housing community and killed a woman who had just arrived at the center to visit her elderly mother. Last fall, during a presidential debate, a well-known national political commentator openly pondered on social media why Israel was being discussed so many times when she tweeted, "How many bleeping Jews do these people think there are in the United States?" When this pundit received an opportunity on a national show to clarify, she doubled down and delivered an even more despicable anti-Semitic statement. While many were appalled by these words, a social media phrase trended with some popularity supporting this pundit and her anti-Semitic message. Our world is not perfect. There is a Hebrew phrase, tikkun olam, fixing a broken world. Over 11 million people were killed during the Holocaust. At Yom HaShoah, we mourn the 6 million Jews killed. In addition to our Jewish ancestors, an additional 5 million people were killed for their beliefs. Gypsies, homosexuals, communists, people of color, those who were different from the Aryan race that the Nazis sought the Nazis. Intolerance and discrimination are not a thing of the past. They occur every day. In every age, a hero or sage came to our aid. Today on this Yom HaShoah, we cannot wait for a hero or sage to come to our aid. You can be that hero. You can be that sage. When messages of hate or intolerance are shared, do not stand idly by. It is important to speak up to help stop them. The United States was founded by people who fled their home countries to find freedom of religion, something that is so core to our country that is guaranteed under the First Amendment. When that is threatened, it is incumbent upon each of us to come to the aid, to be that hero or sage.
We will now light the memorial and honorary candles, beginning with those lit by the Holocaust survivors themselves. Dr. Fred Kater. Dr. Kater was born in Antwerp, Belgium in 1940. His mother had the foresight to send him away from the train station before deportation in the hope of saving his life. He was hidden in a convent and then a Jewish orphanage in Wiesenbeek. After the war, Fred was taken in by extended relatives living in Canada. In 1974, he moved to Omaha with his wife to practice medicine. Marcel and Ilse Kahn. Observing the imminent danger in Germany, Marcel and Ilse Kahn's families sought a way to America in 1938. When they were just small children, each of their families were able to acquire an affidavit under David Kaufman of Grand Island. With this special assistance, they left everything they knew behind, but were able to survive and settle in Omaha. Marcel later served in the United States Air Force. Beatrice Karp. Beatrice Karp was born in Lauterbach, Germany. When she was just 8, Bee and her family were sent to concentration camps in Vichy, France. Bee and her younger sister were saved by the French Jewish underground, the Oze, and hidden in nearly 15 different homes and a convent before the war's end. She came to New York in 1947 and later settled with her family in Omaha. Esther Silver. Esther Silver, from the town of Benzin, Poland, was forced into the ghetto in 1942 and then transported to the Oberallstadt work camp until the end of the war. Esther and her husband Norman were the sole survivors of their immediate families. After spending time in a displaced persons camp, they settled in Omaha in 1949. Kitty Williams. Kitty was born in Sarand, Hungary in 1924. She spent a short time in a ghetto before being transported to Auschwitz. Kitty was later moved to the Allendorf work camp, where she was forced to work with toxic chemicals and to chisel powder out of undetonated bombs. She was eventually liberated by the American Army and settled in Council Bluffs, Iowa in 1947. At this time, I would also like to mention Eli and Ann Modenstein, survivors of the Holocaust who live here in Lincoln. Many of you may know them. Unfortunately, they're feeling under the weather today and could not join us, but we're certainly thinking of them. We will now also light a candle in memory of the Nebraskan Holocaust survivors who died this past year. These survivors include Leon Brand, Sam Freed, and Lou Leviticus. The candle will be lit by Lou's loving wife, Rose Leviticus. We will now light a candle in honor of all World War II military liberators and other rescuers. The candle will be lit by Coach Stuart Venable. Venable is a veteran of the United States Army. He went on to serve the Department of Justice for 20-plus years as a lieutenant, special operations response team leader, and sports specialist. Venable is currently a PE teacher and head strength coach for Lincoln High School, as well as holding multiple state and national weightlifting championship titles. And finally, we will light a candle for more recent victims of genocide and all those currently seeking refuge or asylum. The candle will be lit by Saif Mahoub. Mahoub is a refugee himself from Sudan, having traveled across Egypt by foot and eventually finding a home in the United States. Mahoub is a very proud veteran of the United States Army.
Please rise. El Male Rachamim, Shochen Bameromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei Ashchina, B'malot Kedoshim Utorim, Kezohar Harakia Masirim, Et Nishmot Kol Achenu B'nei Yisrael, Shenitbechu B'Shoah, Anashim, Nashim, V'Tav, Shenechneku, V'Shenisrefu, V'Shenehergu, Shemasru, Et Nafsham Al Kiddush Hashem, B'Gan Eden Tehei Menuchatam, Ana Ba'al Harachamim, Hastirem B'Seter Kenafecha Le'olamim, Utzror B'Tzror Achayim, Et Nishmotehem, Adonai hunachalatam, v'yanuchu v'shalom, al mishkavotehem, v'nomar, amen. Please join me in the English. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the souls of our brethren who perished in the Shoah, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered, suffocated, and burned to ashes. May their memory endure and inspire deeds of charity and goodness in our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life. May they rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated.
We conclude our commemoration every year with this responsive reading. And as we read it and respond together as a community, we will stand as witnesses that we will never forget. We will ensure that this never happens again. We will honor the memory of those that were lost and honor the lives of those who were fortunate enough to survive. And we will continue to share that lesson with our children and anyone who will hear it. This will never happen again. In a few moments, I will ask those who are able to rise again. Where it says all and we join together as one voice, that is when we shall stand together, standing as witnesses. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Please rise together as a community. May we remember the unspeakable horrors of the Shoah, the cruelty, terror, and pain that human beings inflicted upon others whom they regarded as less than human. May we remember the victims, their lives and their deaths. For each human being is an entire world, and among the greatest obligations we have is to remember their names, even as their murderers sought to erase them forever. May we not only remember, but act now in our time to assure that never again will a repetition of the horrors of the Holocaust go unanswered. May God bless all in attendance today. May God continue to bless those survivors who join us and grace us with their presence. And may the memories of all who were lost continue to be a blessing to us all. Zichronam livracha. Special thank yous go to the organizers today and to all the speakers and the wonderful young people who shared their poetry. This concludes our service for this afternoon. Thank you so much for your attendance. Shalom.